My name is Meghan, and I'm the communication manager at a center called Closer, and this is my colleague Sam, and Sam's a researcher with us. We're going to talk today very broadly about longitudinal resources in the UK. Can I just have a show of hands who might be intending to use longitudinal resources in their PhD? Excellent. Okay. So what I would say is this presentation is going to be quite high level, but what we've done is we've saved a lot of time at the end for questions because our experience has been that people tend to come to these very, very large, very broad data sets with very, very specific questions. So we'll try and go through this and then have time at the end for questions. So I'm going to then ask over to you guys. What is a longitudinal study? Over time. Yep, great. Okay. Sorry, I missed a slide. This is what we're going to go over first. So just a bit about cohort longitudinal studies. Over to Sam to tell us a bit about what these studies have found. And then look at the end at some resources for research. So, yeah, looking at what is a longitudinal study, first of all. That's exactly it. It follows the same sample over several different points in time. That's really crucial to understand. Then these cases at each age point can then be linked together, and that really allows you to look at processes over the life course and understand change at an individual level. So I find it's often easier to understand what a longitudinal study is by looking at it versus a cross-sectional study. So you can see it's sort of one point in time, several points in time, different samples, even in a repeated cross-sectional study, versus the same sample over the whole of the life course. The value of a cross-sectional study would be giving you that snapshot of a given point in time and to look at change at a really societal level. And the longitudinal study will give you a better sense of the change at the individual level. And then just some examples here at the bottom of different types of each. What we're going to be talking about today is mostly drawing on examples from the British birth cohort studies, which is what Sam and I do in our day jobs. So we'll be drawing on examples from the Millennium cohort study and the 1958 birth cohort study. So, what is in this data? So I think it's important to look first at the sources. So we have the cohort member themselves. This would be in a birth cohort study. So we're interviewing that cohort member every time we go to visit them. But at different points in their lives, we also talk to the important people in their lives. So when they're children, that's talking to their parents, perhaps their older siblings, teachers. And as they get older, we will occasionally talk to partners, their children, so that we can get sort of a richer sense of the life they're living. As I mentioned before, multiple age points. So surveys closer together as they're growing up, and then they sort of get further apart, sort of 4 to 5 years, as the cohort member gets older. You can understand that's because as children are younger, they're changing faster, so it's important to capture that information more frequently. And then something we're really trying to do more of is linking the survey data that we have in the cohort studies to administrative records. And what this does is it adds a huge amount of information on educational attainment, on use of healthcare services that would take quite a long time to collect via the cohort member themselves, whereas we could do that slightly more easily by linking those records together. So just to give an example of what that looks like, we're going to look at the Millennium cohort study, which has been following 19,000 children who were born in 2000 to 2001. So we've interviewed them we visited them, I should say, 9 months, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 11 years, and we're currently in the field now at age 14. Up until age 11, the primary respondent was the mother or the primary carer. We also, at every age, have spoken to the father or the primary carer's partner, so whoever's living in the home with the child. From age 3, we've been involving the child themselves, obviously not in an interview with a 3-year-old, but through other methods such as measuring their physical and cognitive development. In these 3 years, we were actually also able to talk to the older siblings if they had them, and at ages, once they started school to when they finished primary school, we've been able to talk to the teachers as well. At the moment, we have educational health records and birth records linked to the cohort. So you can see that all these information sources together is building quite a rich picture of the children born at the turn of the century. So, those were the sources of data. So what are we actually collecting information on? Well, it's a huge number of different things. The Millennium cohort and the 1958 cohort, which we'll be using throughout the study, are sort of more socially focused, but do have quite a lot of biomedical information as well. Other cohorts like the 46 or Allspac, those are more biomedically focused with social measures as well. But really, there isn't anything we don't cover, I would say. So here's just a few things. I think when Sam comes to her talk, she'll be able to give you a bit more of an insight into just how much we've been able to cover. So the real value that these kinds of studies are bringing to research is to give you a better sense and a better representation of social processes, how something like weight gain changes from when you're a child to when you're an adult. It's not just you're born fat, you stay fat your whole life, and it changes across generation as well. The sheer breadth of variables that are available in these studies mean that we're able to control for more and more things, and so we're able to get closer and closer to what are causal effects. Because in the UK we have so many cohort studies following generations back to 1946, we're able to distinguish not just how something might change over the course of your life, but we're also understanding how things are able to change across generations of people in Britain as well. And I think longitudinal studies allow us just to investigate how time itself influences some processes and outcomes. So, a bit of a plug for what we've got here in the UK. The UK has one of the largest portfolios of longitudinal studies of any country in the world, and in particular, it's home to the longest running national birth cohorts. So in 1946, they set up the first one that is still going today. In 58, 1970, the gap that Francis Burstow pointed out this morning through the 80s, next to the Millennium cohort study and life study, which started recruiting last year and will recruit through to 2018. So there's really nowhere better in the world to be if you want to use this kind of data. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Sam now, who's going to tell us.
Okay, so this is a very brief snapshot of what the studies can tell us. So the data has enabled us to understand largely how the early experiences impact on later outcomes, and how different experiences relate to each other, and then how these relationships change over time. That's both in relationship to age of the individual, or indeed across the generations. So all of the both cohort studies have shown strong relationship between early socio-economic circumstances, such as parental social class or levels of education, and a range of child and adult outcomes. And this is even after controlling for a whole range of other mediating factors that from the data that we've collected. So for example, early circumstances impact a lot on an individual's general health and on their health behaviours, so smoking, diet, and exercise, on their later occupation, physical capability as an adult, it has that long-reaching effect, and also on their involvement in education when they leave school, and then of the qualifications that people actually come out with. So before, a bit of a messy slide, but before looking at some specific research findings, this is how all the information can be drawn together to show a hypothetical life history For this study, this is the 1958 cohort. So they're born 1958, and then later on they were interviewed when they were 7, 11, 16, 23 and 33. And then as they move into their 40s, this is when we've been able to interview them on a more regular basis, thanks essentially to more sound funding from the ESRC. So they've been interviewed at 42, and then 46, 50, and most recently at 55, and they will again be interviewed when they're 60. So back to the whatever is on the left-hand side for you, end of the graph. You can see here all the information that we've collected, either from the cohort member themselves, from their parent, their teachers, or nurses who did medical assessments of them. Can all be brought together. And in fact, this was back in the birth survey. This was the first study that first collected information on whether the mother smokes during pregnancy. So that's how we've got that information. So we can relate that to early socioeconomic circumstances, and in turn to child health outcomes as they go through childhood and into adolescence. We've also got cognitive scores, so they did reading and maths tests, for example, when they were 7, 11 and 16, and we can relate this to their early childhood socioeconomic circumstances and changes in their family life. So, and by having this longitudinal data, so kind of get at the temporal ordering of things, so we can see whether parental divorce actually, for example, had an impact on the teenagers' exam performance when they were 16. So their not GCSEs for this slide, this would be O-levels. And so does parental divorce have an impact on that? Because we can also take into account all of the other things that happened beforehand to see whether it actually does have it retains a direct effect. Moving into adulthood, as Meghan said, the focus moves much more onto the cohort member themselves and their family circumstances. But we know now, so 1981, when they were 23, that's when they were interviewed, so we know when they left education, what qualifications they had at this point, what their first job was, what age they were when they had their first job, and actually how long even they stayed in it. And then for themselves, when they got married, if they've got married, how long that marriage lasted, when they had their first and even second child. And then as it's got older, it's actually quite a big interview at age 33, and there's a lot, we actually interviewed their partner if they had one at that point, and gathered a lot of information on their attitudes and working out preferences, etc. And then as we've moved on, I mean, this actually stops in 2004, but if we go on up, the last one was 2012, they were interviewed. And during that one, we asked a lot about savings and pensions and whether they actually had caring responsibilities for their parents. Because they're 55, this generation is classically now the sandwich generation, because they might have children living at home, might even be grandparents, but increasingly they actually have these caring responsibilities for their parents as well. So we have to see how all that pans out, but again we'll be going back to them when they're 60. Okay, so that's just, as I say, a hypothetical way of joining all of the information together. So on to some more recent findings. This is from the Millennium Cohort study, and show here that when children were 7, children with disabilities were twice as likely to be bullied as their non-disabled counterparts. And this was true even when we took into account a wide range of other factors that have also been linked to bullying, such as poverty in the home or their own cognitive ability, any behavioural problems they might have, and height and weight, so if they were overweight or obese. So yeah, it's very sad finding. And staying with bullying, and looking at the 58 cohort, researchers found here that adults who were actually bullied as children were more likely to experience mental health problems than those who hadn't been bullied. And this includes suicidal thoughts, depression, anxiety disorders, and measures of psychological distress. Turning to the 1970 cohort, Again, researchers have found that those who read regularly as children were from more advantaged backgrounds and had higher vocabulary scores at age 10 than those who were infrequent readers at age 10, which is perhaps, unsurprising. But what they've also found with the most recent data is that even when you take into account all of these factors, regular readers at age 10 had significantly higher vocabulary scores in a test that they sat at age 42. So that's taking into account their previous levels of vocabulary and other measures. Okay, so changes over the life course. Overweight and obesity. So we all know it's constantly on news and documentaries that busy lifestyles and increasing availability of high-calorie convenience food has a major impact on body size, and that's adults and children alike. But what we've been able to see in the Millennium cohort is that when they were age 5, 21% of the children were classified as overweight or obese, and that's with using the BMI, body mass index. And with the same children, by age 7, this had gone up to 25%. And actually, quite a huge increase by age 11, it was more than a third, at 35%. And we've also seen how negatively being overweight and obese is for their reported happiness and self-esteem levels. Okay, so turning to physical capability amongst older adults. So this is, we found differences in how men and women self-report difficulties with day-to-day physical tasks, such as walking or climbing stairs as they get older. And this uses information from the 46 cohort. So at age 43, I don't know if it's just, but 5% of women, 3% of men, problems with walking due to a long-term health problem. But just 10 years later, this had increased enormously to 28% of women and 12% of men. What we've also done in terms of repeated questions, these same questions have been included in the 1958 cohort when there were 55, so we'll be able to look at whether this gender difference is repeated in the younger cohort. But that's not been done as yet. Sorry, okay, generational change. Returning to obesity, we found that despite being a similar weight in childhood, those born in 1958 were beginning to become overweight at an earlier point in time than those born in 1946, So they were getting overweight during their 20s, whereas the 46 cohort were becoming overweight in their 30s. Although this was at the same period of time, it's the 1980s, which is perhaps when mass convenience food first became so readily available. And moving on to those born in 1970, when they're age 42, we've got 20% of women and 23% of men who are classified as being obese. And this is an increase from the 1958 cohort, where just 16% were obese at the same point in time, so when they were age 42. Okay, a quick foray into women's employment. As we all know, the 20th century saw a dramatic change in women's position in the labour market. So just as a snapshot of that, we looked at age 26 and found that half of women born in 1946 were working at this point, whereas this increased to over 3/4 for those who were born in 1970. And then what we also found is the career break after childbirth has reduced substantially over the same period of time. It was 6 years for those who had their first child in the 46 cohort, decreasing to 2 years in the 58 and down to 1 for those born in 1970. Okay, and finally, in the generational change, looking at family structure. So when the children born in 1958 were 11, nearly 9 in 10 of them lived with both natural parents. Divorce and parenthood were really rare. But by the time we get to the Millennium cohort, this had reduced to 6 in 10 children, both parents when they were 11, and more than 1 in 4 were the lone parent, and 1 in 8 lived a lone parent and a step-parent.
Now I'm just going to do a bit of a spiel about us. So as I said, we're an organisation called Closer. We're a consortium of 9 longitudinal studies, the British Library and the UK Data Service. We're funded by both the ESRC and the Medical Research Council. And touching on a bit about what we said earlier, we were set up with the idea that the UK has all these many longitudinal resources, but we really, I guess it's sort of the greater than the sum of your parts. How together could we be making even more of a difference to research and to society? So we identified 5 key areas of work. Data harmonization, like we mentioned earlier, harmonizing variables across different studies so that we can do more generational analysis. Data linkage, looking at linking the survey data to government records, as well as some geographical data. We are building a search platform where you'll be able to go, search, I'm interested in smoking, and the results that will be returned will be, well, these studies covered smoking, they covered them at these ages, which were in these years, and they asked these questions. So in terms of planning research and getting to grips with these enormous data sets a bit faster, that's sort of the purpose of the search platform. We'll have a first version of it ready in the spring, and then hoping to get a bit of testing done and a bit of feedback, and then producing a full version the following year. And then I think you guys have been hearing quite a lot about this today, research impact and training as part of that. We're also here to make a bit of a case for the cohorts, encourage more people to use them, both the data themselves, but also the findings from them. So really our overarching objective is to maximise the use, value and impact of the UK's longitudinal studies. These are the studies that are involved. So we've got the 5 national birth cohorts, Understanding Society, the Household Panel Survey, and then 3 regional studies. So the Avon Longitudinal Study of Parents and Children, born in 1991-92. The Southampton Women's Survey of children of similar age to the Millennium Cohort, and the Hertfordshire Cohort Study, one of my favourite quirky studies, which was some researchers in the 1990s found records kept by a midwife in the 1930s of birth, really, really detailed records. They were able to follow those people up and have been following ever since they're in their 90s now. I should just say one thing on access. The ESRC funded studies, the data is available from the UK Data Service, so that's 5870 Millennium, Will Be Life, and Understanding Society. The other studies, you have to contact them directly. So there's a little bit more information on our website about how you would add the different access procedures for each one. So as I said, we are building this search platform. The other thing on our website is a contextual database, where we're looking at mostly ONS data that might be able to provide some context to things that you would find in the life course of a birth cohort, so things like birth and death rates, marriage and divorce rates, like that. We are also building an online evidence bank where we're summarising, as Sam just did, what have we found from the cohort studies on different topics. That's a sort of key thing you need to do when you're trying to encourage impact and you're trying to encourage non-research users. We are currently putting together, and I do apologise that we don't have them quite ready yet, but training workshops, teaching data sets, seminars and other events, and they'll be looking more specialised at things like harmonisation and linkage, and then a whole training package around using the search platform itself. And when we are finished harmonising and linking these data sets, we hope to make them available as well. And then the last thing I want to say is that while Sam and I are here today as Closer, we also work for the Centre for Longitudinal Studies, which manages the 1958-1970 and Millennium Cohort. And we have our own set of resources for researchers. So the CLS bibliography on our website allows you to, it's a searchable database of publications based on cohort data. So that's quite good for literature reviews, finding out what other people have done on your topic with these data. That is, every time we finish a survey, we do produce initial findings. So our researchers go through the new data set themselves and try and pull out what's interesting and identify potential avenues for research for other researchers to use. And lots of documentation, data notes, technical reports on how the data was collected. So that's also, this is all the types of documentation we have. And then we are also doing online and in-person training, so webinars and in-person training on how to use the data. This is more focused on first-time users. We are currently planning this year's set, and when those are ready, they're on our website. If you register with our website, you will get a notification about them.